Hello again, and welcome back to the Social Contract Research Network. In this episode, I'd like to think together with you about an item that's been in the news recently. And I'd like to think through that item with you from a social contract perspective. The news item is the push for everybody to get vaccinated. And the context is this. COVID policy in Australia has undergone something of a silent revolution over the last couple of months. Because from the beginning of the outbreak until about June or July this year, the policy was very much one of containment. The aim was to get COVID cases down to zero. We do that through hand hygiene, we do that through lockdowns, we do that through border controls. Well, not anymore. Because with lockdowns in New South Wales and in Victoria seemingly unable to halt the progress of the Delta variant, we've entered a new era. We've entered the era of vaccination. And those in favour of mass vaccination are frequently arguing that although it's not legally enforceable and should not be legally enforceable, it is part of our social contract to get vaccinated. And very interestingly, those who are against that sort of language also use social contract language, claiming that they've never signed or seen this so-called social contract, and so why should they be constrained by it? So what I'd like to ask in this episode is, what is this social contract that both pro and anti-vaxxers are hanging their arguments on these days? And what does social contract language add to the vaccination debate? We can think of the social contract as a glue that holds society together. It's the unwritten trust, it's the implicit expectations that govern relationships between you and me, but also between citizens and the state and citizens and corporations. So, for example, it's part of the social contract that governments should try to deliver on what they've promised. It's often not legally enforceable, but it's what we expect. It's the trust that we put in governments. It's part of the social contract that citizens should not try through violence to overthrow a government that they didn't vote for. That a government that's been elected by a majority has a right to rule, everything being equal. It's also part of the social contract that corporations should try to pay their employees fairly. Now, these unwritten rules often overlap with laws and with regulations, but they also go deeper than laws and regulations, because the social contract is not about keeping or breaking the law. It's about keeping or breaking the mutual trust that prevents society from imploding. And that trust goes deeper than law. Law requires trust in a way that can't be said the other way round. Trust doesn't rest upon law in our society. Our society is held together by trust more fundamentally than it is held together by law. In the words of Minouche Shafiq's recent book, social contract language, therefore, is a way of talking about, quote, what we owe to each other, not in terms of money, but in terms of the social bond, in terms of human relationships, what we're entitled to expect of each other in society. And when we turn to the way in which that language is used in the vaccine debate, we see a very polarised landscape. On the one hand, we've got articles like that written by the Vice-Chancellor of Deakin University in the Sydney Morning Herald on August the 9th, where he says, there is no doubt that getting vaccinated is part of the social contract that enables us to lead full and healthy lives, close quote. Now, he's one of many people to have used social contract language in this debate in the past weeks. And I want to ask, what does it add on top of other arguments about vaccine to evoke the social contract? Well, I think what it adds is something like this. In the view of those people making this argument, it adds the sense that those who refuse to get vaccinated are not just exercising a right to choose, they're actually violating a fundamental trust and a common interest that undergirds society. They are therefore quite literally being anti-social. They're dissolving the glue that holds society together. Because social contract arguments come into play when my actions affect not only me, but you as well. Let's think of an example. So, what flavour ice cream I choose to eat this evening for dinner is a matter that really only affects my waistline and doesn't immediately impinge upon your life. It is, by the way, always cookies and cream, in case you're wondering. But if we take another example, whether I choose to drive down the freeway 30 kilometres an hour above the speed limit is part of the social contract, because my speed has real consequences for the people in the cars around me in a way that me eating too much ice cream doesn't have immediate consequences for the people around me. So then, is not getting vaccinated like choosing an ice cream flavour, or is not getting vaccinated like speeding? Well, some people have genuine concerns about the effectiveness and side effects of COVID vaccines, and they need to be addressed. And others are unable to receive vaccines on medical grounds, and that needs to be respected. But research strongly suggests that having the shot is safer than remaining unvaccinated. Not completely safe, but safer than the alternative. And that having the shot reduces transmission rates of the virus as well. And therefore, with a finite number of hospital beds available in any given jurisdiction, unless I go and live a solitary life in the outback all by myself and refuse any contact with other people, my decision to get vaccinated or not to get vaccinated is inevitably going to have an impact on those around me. Obeying the speed limit then, and getting vaccinated if I'm medically able to, are part of what I owe to you, my fellow citizens. But there have also been significant uses of social contract language recently against vaccination. And I'd like to take a close look at those now. There are two main ones. And the first is that it infringes on my freedom, the freedom that society owes me as a citizen. So recent anti-vax and anti-lockdown protests in Sydney and Melbourne were billed as freedom rallies. Their banners proclaimed, "We don't need your vax, we want our freedom." There was emergency SOS, Free Australia, and freedom, not fear. So freedom is right at the heart of this line of argument in society at the moment. So is it an exercise of freedom not to get vaccinated? Well, social contract theory teaches us to distinguish between two different sorts of freedom. My freedom to murder you is unreservedly taken from me under the law of almost all countries, as is my freedom to walk out of a department store with a laptop under my arm that I haven't paid for. But those same laws that limit my freedom to do whatever I want also increase the freedom of all of us to live our lives with a reduced fear of getting murdered, and increase the freedom of shop owners to run a business that doesn't go bust. Social contract theory puts it this way. When we live together in society, we give up our so-called natural freedom, the freedom to do whatever we want, and we gain a new civil freedom to enjoy the benefits of common life. Getting vaccinated enhances our civil freedom. It allows more people to do more things with fewer risks than would be the case otherwise. And as for our natural freedom, well, we left that behind when we decided that life together in society was better than going it alone in the forest. Natural freedom is about my good and my interest. Civil freedom is about the common good and the common interest. And we can't live in society as if natural freedom were the only freedom that we have, because it isn't. The second prominent argument against vaccination goes like this. Show me, please, where I signed this so-called social contract, and I'll obey it. Well, the idea is that of consent, isn't it? It's a founding principle of democracy. It's a very important principle for us, that we shouldn't be expected to do things that we haven't agreed to. Consent is important. But does it apply in the case of vaccines? Think about an example with me. You and I didn't consent to be born. We didn't sign our own birth certificate. But now that we are born, we have obligations to respect other people. In the same way, we're all members of a particular society. None of us asked to be in society. We may not like it. We may think it's broken. We may want to change it. But as long as we continue to enjoy its benefits, we've got a responsibility to uphold the mutual trust that keeps it together and that keeps us together. So what then does social contract language add to the vaccine debate? Two things, I think. First of all, it adds the truth that our society doesn't simply run on the fuel of laws, it runs on the fuel of trust. And that trust is deeper than laws. Trust is what keeps us together, not a common legal system. And upholding that trust is an important part of what it means to live together in society. Secondly, this social contract language also shows that vaccination is not an isolated issue. It shows that it's part of a much bigger fabric of what it means to live together in society. We all accept these principles, the principles of the social contract, and we accept them many, many times each day. So, for example, every time that I keep away from people when I've got a cold so that I don't pass it on to them. Every time I get a flu jab, not only for my own sake, but for the sake of my elderly relatives, or even for the sake of people I might bump into down the supermarket. Every time I don't barge in at the front of a queue at the supermarket checkout. On all these occasions and many more, I'm putting into practice the principles of trust that undergird the social contract. And it's those same principles that obtain in the vaccine debate. So this is not a new set of ideas that's suddenly arisen in relation to vaccines. It's an extension of principles that undergird our whole lives every single day. So therefore, it's not fundamentally about vaccines. It's about living together. It's about what we owe each other. And therefore, it's about the social contract.